The fluorescent lights in the Collier County Hospital emergency room flickered with mechanical indifference as Julia Brennan's blood pressure monitor shrieked its urgent warning. 180 over 120. The numbers glowed red on the screen like accusations. Dr. Lahiri's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and clinical. "Mrs. Brennan, if we don't intervene immediately, you're going to lose this baby." Julia lay on the gurney, her hands clutching the metal rail so tightly her knuckles had turned white. At 7 months pregnant, her body had become a battlefield, and she was losing. The hospital gown clung to her sweat-drenched skin. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a neat ponytail, now stuck to her forehead in damp strands. "Not today," she whispered, the words barely audible above the beeping machines. "Please, not today." A nurse pressed an oxygen mask over her face. Another inserted an IV line with practiced efficiency. Julia's vision blurred at the edges, the room tilting like a ship in a storm. Through the haze, she saw Dr. Lahiri's lips moving, forming words she couldn't quite hear. "We need to know what caused this spike in blood pressure," the doctor was saying. "Mrs. Brennan, what happened today? What stressed you to this level?" Julia closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, images flashed like a broken film strip, a dusty fairground. The crack of an auctioneer's gavel, a man holding a baby beside a cardboard crib, a stranger's gaze meeting hers across a crowd that had turned away. 3 hours earlier, she had made a choice that would change 3 lives forever. 3 hours earlier, she had still believed she could control anything. The words 3 hours earlier appeared in her mind like a title card, and Julia let herself fall backward through time. The Texas sun beat down on the Collier County Fairgrounds with the relentless intensity of an anvil hammer. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer, that turned asphalt soft and made breathing feel like work. Julia Brennan sat in her Honda Civic with the engine running and the air conditioning on full blast, staring at the manila envelope on her passenger seat. The envelope had arrived 3 days ago from Wallace and Associates, the law firm handling Thomas's estate. Her late husband's estate. 6 months had passed since cancer had taken him, and still the word late felt wrong in her mouth, like calling a sunset late instead of gone. Inside the envelope was a letter, brief and formal, requesting her presence at the county auction. "One final item requiring your attention," it had said. Nothing more. No explanation. Just an address and a time. Julia hadn't planned to come. She had spent the morning at home, sitting in Thomas's reading chair, one hand on her swollen belly where their son grew, the other holding the ultrasound photo she carried everywhere now. The black and white image showed a tiny profile, a button nose, a fist near a mouth. A baby who would never know his father. "Your pregnancy is high risk," Dr. Lahiri had told her 2 weeks ago. "You need complete rest. No stress, no emotional upheaval." Julia had laughed at that, a short, bitter sound. How was a widow supposed to avoid emotional upheaval? How was a woman supposed to rest when every room in her house whispered with absence? But something had pulled her to the fairgrounds today, some invisible thread connected to Thomas, to the mystery of what he might have left unfinished. So she had driven the 12 miles from her farmhouse, parked in the dusty lot, and now sat frozen, unable to open the car door. Through the windshield, she could see the auction tent. Folding tables lined with items that had once meant something to someone. Furniture, tools, household goods, the debris of foreclosed lives. People milled about in the heat, examining merchandise with the clinical detachment of vultures. Julia reached for the ultrasound photo again, her daily talisman. On the back, in Thomas's handwriting, from before his hands had grown too weak to hold a pen, were 3 words: "Keep going, Jules." She took a breath, then another. Then she opened the car door and stepped into the furnace of a Texas summer afternoon. The auction tent provided shade, but no relief from the heat. Bodies pressed together, creating a human oven. The smell of sweat and dust and desperation hung thick in the air. Julia wove through the crowd, one hand protectively over her belly, the other clutching her bitter's paddle. Number 23. An auctioneer stood on a makeshift platform, his voice amplified by a crackling sound system. He was a man in his 60s with a weathered face and the rhythmic patter of someone who had done this job for decades. Going once, going twice, sold a bidder, 41 for $75. The gavel came down with a crack that made Julia flinch. She pushed forward, looking for whatever Thomas had wanted her to see. Furniture lots, farm equipment, boxes of kitchen supplies, nothing that seemed to require her attention specifically. Nothing that explained the cryptic letter. Then the crowd shifted and Julia saw him. A man stood at the far end of the tent, next to what could only be described as a makeshift crib constructed from cardboard boxes and blankets. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the lean, weathered build of someone who worked outdoors. His jeans were worn, his boots scuffed, his plaid shirt faded from too many washings. A cowboy hat sat on a nearby table, sweat stained around the band. But it was his face that stopped Julia cold. Weathered skin that spoke of too much sun and not enough sleep. A jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. And eyes the color of faded denim, holding an exhaustion so profound it seemed to radiate outward like heat waves. In his arms, he held a baby. The infant couldn't have been more than 2 weeks old, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket that had seen better days. The baby was sleeping. Tiny fists curled near her face, completely oblivious to the chaos of the auction around them. The auctioneer's voice cut through Julia's shock. Lot number 47, household goods, livestock equipment, and... He paused, clearly uncomfortable. Pending legal review, custodial guardianship. The crowd went silent. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone knows they're witnessing something wrong, but no one wants to be the first to name it. Julia's mind struggled to process what she was hearing. They were auctioning this man and baby together, bundling them like furniture, selling them as a lot number. The man holding the baby wasn't pleading, wasn't making a scene. He just stood there cradling the infant with infinite care, his face a mask of quiet desperation. "Do I hear an opening bid?" the auctioneer asked. His voice had lost its rhythmic enthusiasm. $300 for the lot? No one moved. The crowd that had been so eager to bid on tables and tools now stood frozen, unwilling to participate in whatever moral violation this represented. Julia's hand moved to her purse, fingers finding the photograph tucked inside. Not the ultrasound, the other one. An old picture, corners worn from handling. Thomas and another man, both younger, both grinning, standing in front of a ranch house. On the back, in Thomas's handwriting, Brothers by Choice, 2003. She had found this photo last month while going through Thomas's things. She had never seen the other man before, had never heard Thomas mention a brother by choice, but the photo had been in Thomas's wallet, carried close for years. Now, looking at the man holding the baby across the auction tent, Julia felt something click into place. The shape of the jaw, the set of the shoulders. This could be the man from the photograph, aged by 17 years, and what looked like a lifetime of hardship. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Thomas in the hospital bed 3 weeks before he died, his voice weak but urgent. "Jules, if something happens to me, and you ever meet a man named Ridge, a friend of mine, if he needs help, don't turn him away. Promise me." She had promised. Of course she had promised. She would have promised Thomas anything in those final days. "Do I hear 300? The auctioneer repeated. Desperation crept into his voice now. He needed to close this lot, move on, forget this ever happened. Julia's hand rose before her conscious mind had made the decision. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. 500. Every head in the tent turned toward her. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. The man with the baby, he went very still, his blue eyes finding hers across the crowd, wary, disbelieving, searching for the angle, the catch, the cruelty that must be hiding beneath this unexpected kindness. $500, the auctioneer repeated, relief flooding his voice. "Do I hear 550? Silence. "Going once?" He raised the gavel. "Going twice." Julia kept her eyes on the man holding the baby. Something passed between them in that moment. Not understanding, not trust, just a desperate, fragile thread of hope. The gavel fell. Sold to bidder 23. The sound echoed in Julia's chest like a gunshot. What had she just done? The crowd dispersed quickly after that, eager to move away from the uncomfortable scene. Julia made her way to the registration table on legs that felt uncertain. Her hands shook as she filled out the paperwork, as she wrote a check for $500, money she couldn't really afford, but somehow couldn't not spend. The clerk, a tired woman with reading glasses on a chain, processed the transaction without meeting Julia's eyes. Lot 47 includes household goods, listed livestock equipment, and, she paused, the individuals involved. You'll need to coordinate directly with them for, transfer of custody. Transfer of custody. As if this were a normal transaction, as if she had just bought a used car instead of intervening in what should never have been allowed to happen in the first place. Julia took the receipt and turned to find the man standing 3 feet away, the baby still cradled carefully in his arms. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, could see the way his shirt hung loose on his frame, as if he'd lost weight recently, could see the careful, practiced way he supported the infant's head, the gesture of someone who had been doing this for days without break. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel over rust. "I need you to know I'm good for whatever you paid back there. I'll work it off, every penny." Julia looked at him, really looked, and saw pride fighting with desperation. Saw a man who had lost everything but was still trying to maintain some shred of dignity. "It was $500, she said quietly, "and my name is Julia, Julia Brennan." Something flickered in those blue eyes. Recognition, pain? It was gone too quickly for her to identify. "Brennan," he repeated. "Thomas Brennan's widow?" The world tilted. "You knew my husband?" The man's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble. "I knew Thomas. We were friends. A long time ago." He paused. "I didn't know he had passed. I'm sorry for your loss." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and it hit Julia like a physical blow. Another piece of Thomas's life she had never known about. Another secret her husband had carried to his grave. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ridge Crawford." Ridge, the name from Thomas's deathbed request. The man in the photograph. Julia's knees went weak, and she had to lock them to stay upright. "You're the friend," she said. "The one Thomas wanted me to help." Ridge looked at her with such open confusion that she knew he had no idea what she was talking about. "Thomas never mentioned me to you?" "Not until the very end." Julia shifted her weight, suddenly aware of how hot the tent was, how her maternity blouse was sticking to her back. "He made me promise. If you needed help, I wouldn't turn you away." Ridge closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. "That sounds like Thomas, taking care of people even from beyond the grave." The baby stirred in Ridge's arms, making a soft sound. He automatically adjusted his hold, began a gentle rocking motion without seeming to think about it. "What's her name?" Julia asked. "Lily. Lily Crawford." Ridge's voice softened when he said it. "She's 10 days old. Where's her mother?" The question hung in the air for a moment too long. Ridge's face closed off, the brief vulnerability disappearing behind a wall of carefully controlled emotion. "Her parents are dead," he said flatly. "Car accident 3 weeks ago. My brother Daniel and his wife Natalie. I'm all the family Lily has left." Julia felt her throat tighten. This baby girl, barely 2 weeks old, already an orphan. And this man, standing in an auction tent being sold like property, trying to keep his niece out of the foster care system by any means necessary. "Come on," Julia heard herself say. "Let's get you both out of this heat." Ridge didn't move. "Mrs. Brennan, I appreciate what you did back there, but I can't accept charity. I need to work for what I owe you. Then we'll figure that out. But right now, this baby needs to be somewhere cool, and you look like you haven't eaten in days." Julia gestured toward the parking lot. "My car is air-conditioned. We can talk there." For a moment, Ridge looked like he might refuse. Then Lily made another small sound, and his resolve crumbled. "All right, thank you." They walked through the fairgrounds side by side, not quite together but not separate either. Two strangers bound by a dead man's final wish and $500 at a county auction. Julia's Honda Civic was a furnace despite the shade. She started the engine and cranked the air conditioning while Ridge carefully placed Lily in the back seat, using his body to shield her from the hot air until the cool began to flow. He moved with the efficiency of practice, arranging the baby in a nest of blankets he pulled from a duffel bag. Julia watched in the rearview mirror, fascinated by the care he took. This was not a man learning to handle an infant. This was someone who had been doing it since the beginning. When Ridge finally slid into the passenger seat, he sat rigid, hands on his knees, eyes straight ahead. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner and Lily's soft breathing from the back seat. "I have a farmhouse," Julia said finally. 20 acres about 15 minutes from here. There's a guest room. You and Lily could stay there while we figure things out." Ridge's head turned sharply. "Mrs. Brennan, Julia, please." "Julia," he corrected. "I can't impose on you like that. You don't know me. For all you know, I could be dangerous." "Are you dangerous?" "No." "Then that's settled." Julia put the car in gear and pulled out of the parking lot before he could protest further. They drove in silence down County Road 47, past fields of dried grass, and the occasional ranch house set back from the road. The landscape was brown and parched, waiting for rain that might or might not come. Julia's farmhouse appeared as they crested a small rise, white clapboard with green shutters, surrounded by pasture land that she hadn't had the energy or money to maintain since Thomas died. Ridge looked at the house with the careful assessment of someone who had learned not to get comfortable too quickly. "It's a good piece of land." "It was Thomas's dream," Julia said. "We bought it 8 months ago with life insurance money from his first diagnosis. He wanted space, room to raise a family." She touched her belly. "We thought we'd have more time." She pulled into the gravel driveway and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. Ridge reached for the door handle, then stopped. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Why are you doing this? Really?" Julia thought about the photograph in her purse, about Thomas's final request, about the empty rooms in her house, and the baby growing inside her who would never know his father. About being 34 years old and so lonely she sometimes forgot to speak out loud for entire days. "Because Thomas asked me to," she said, "and because I made him a promise I intend to keep." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough truth for now. Inside, the farmhouse smelled like lavender and lemon oil, the scent of a home trying desperately to feel lived in. Julia had spent the 6 months since Thomas's death cleaning and organizing, as if putting the house in order might somehow put her grief in order too. It hadn't worked. The living room held mismatched furniture collected over years of marriage. Thomas's reading chair, a leather recliner worn soft at the armrests, a couch Julia had inherited from her mother. Built-in bookshelves lined one wall, crammed with novels and farming magazines and medical textbooks Thomas had refused to throw away even after his diagnosis. On the mantel, photographs told the story of a life interrupted, Julia and Thomas, on their wedding day, both impossibly young and certain the future was theirs to plan. Thomas, at the county fair 3 years ago, grinning beside a prize bull. The last photo, taken in the hospital 2 weeks before he died, showed a man reduced to bones and will, his smile still somehow genuine. Ridge stood in the doorway, taking it all in with those watchful blue eyes. Lily had fallen asleep in the car and remained sleeping in his arms, her tiny chest rising and falling with the perfect rhythm of infant breath. "Living room's through there," Julia said, gesturing. "There's a couch if you want to lay her down." Ridge shook his head. "She's fine where she is. Been holding her so long it feels wrong when my arms are empty." Julia understood that. She often woke in the night reaching for Thomas's side of the bed, her arms aching with the absence. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "I have leftover chicken casserole from last night. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning, maybe the day before." Ridge's voice was matter-of-fact, as if going days without food was normal, as if he didn't deserve basic care. Julia felt something harden in her chest. "Sit down, both of you." She moved to the kitchen and began heating the casserole, assembling a plate with more food than one person should eat, but exactly as much as Ridge needed. Through the doorway, she watched him settle carefully on the couch, arranging Lily on his chest. The baby's tiny hand curled against his collarbone. His free hand came up automatically to support her head. This was not the first time he had held her this way. Julia brought the plate and a glass of sweet tea. Ridge accepted them with a nod of thanks, but didn't immediately start eating. Instead, he just stared at the food like he wasn't sure it was real. "It's not poisoned," Julia said, settling into Thomas's chair. The leather still smelled faintly of his aftershave, a scent she couldn't bear to wash away. Ridge's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Then he began to eat, slowly at first, then with the desperate efficiency of someone who had forgotten what a full stomach felt like. Julia watched him and felt her heart break a little more. How had Thomas known this man? What history connected them? And why had her husband never mentioned Ridge in all their years together? "You want to tell me what happened?" she asked quietly. "How you ended up at that auction?" Ridge finished chewing, swallowed, set down his fork with deliberate care. When he spoke, his voice was measured, controlled, like a man reading from a script he had rehearsed. "Daniel was my younger brother. Him and Natalie. They tried for years to have a baby. When she finally got pregnant, Daniel was over the moon, started building a nursery before she was even showing." He paused to shift Lily slightly, adjusting her position with practiced ease. "I was helping Daniel run cattle on the family place. Nothing fancy, small operation. But it had been in our family for 3 generations. Our grandfather built the original house with his own hands." Julia could hear the grief beneath the words. Not fresh grief, but the old kind, the kind that had settled into his bones and become part of his structure. "Car accident happened 3 weeks ago," Ridge continued. "Drunk driver ran a red light in town. Daniel died instantly. Natalie, she held on long enough to deliver Lily by emergency C-section. Then she was gone too." "I'm so sorry." The words felt inadequate, but Julia meant them with every fiber of her being. She knew the specific weight of loss, how it changed the very air you breathed. Ridge nodded acknowledgement. "Hospital bills wiped out what little savings we had. Insurance covered some, but not enough. Daniel had taken out loans to upgrade equipment last year. When I couldn't make the mortgage payments after he died, the bank started foreclosure proceedings. Said I was a poor risk without Daniel's income to back it up. They took everything? House, land, equipment, livestock, even Daniel's truck." Ridge's jaw tightened. "The auctioneer, he's also the bank's representative for the county. He knew I'd been listed as Lily's temporary guardian, knew I didn't have official papers, so he structured the household goods lot to include me and Lily together." "That's illegal," Julia said. "You can't auction custody rights." Technically, he wasn't. He was auctioning household goods with a note that whoever bought the lot would be taking responsibility for an infant whose guardian had no stable housing. Same end result, but just legal enough that no one was going to stop him. The cruelty of it stole Julia's breath. "So you stood there hoping someone would bid on you both together rather than let Lily go into foster care alone." "I couldn't let her go into the system," Ridge said, and for the first time his voice cracked. "Too many kids get lost in foster care, bounced from home to home. I promised Daniel, I promised Natalie, I'd take care of their little girl." Julia looked at Lily's sleeping face. So innocent, so trusting. Already this child had lost everything, and she didn't even know it yet. "What's your plan now?" Julia asked gently. Ridge straightened his shoulders, and she saw him physically pulling himself together. "Find work, save money, get stable housing. Yet prove to the courts I can provide for her. I won't impose on your generosity longer than necessary." "How long do you think that will take?" "Few months? Maybe 6 if I can get hired at one of the big ranches." He met her eyes. "I'm good with cattle, good with my hands. Someone will hire me." Julia thought about the reality of his situation. No permanent address, no references probably, since his only employer had been his dead brother. No way to care for a 10-day-old infant while working 10-hour days on a ranch. The impossibility of it pressed down on her like a physical weight. "What if I told you that you could stay here?" she heard herself say. "You and Lily both, for as long as you need." Ridge went very still. "Mrs. Brennan, Julia, I can't accept that." "Why not?" "The house is too big for one person. The guest room is just sitting empty. And Thomas, he wanted me to help you." "Thomas didn't know I'd show up with a baby and $500 in debt." "No," Julia agreed, "but he knew you'd show up with something, some burden you'd carry alone if I let you. That's why he made me promise." They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The kind of Texas sunset Thomas had loved, had photographed obsessively in the months before he got too sick to hold a camera. "I don't understand," Ridge said finally. "You're pregnant, widowed, you've got your own grief to deal with. Why would you take in strangers?" Julia touched her belly where her son moved, a tiny flutter against her palm. "Because I know what it's like to be alone, to feel like the world has taken everything and left you with nothing but the will to keep breathing. And I know that sometimes the only thing that saves you is someone else choosing to care when they don't have to." Ridge looked at her, really looked, and she saw him see her, not as a savior or a charitable stranger, but as another human being fighting the same exhausting battle against loss and loneliness. "1 month," he said. "Let me stay 1 month. I'll find work, start saving. I'll watch Lily while you're at work if you need. I'll fix things around the house, earn my keep. But 1 month is all I'll accept." Julia wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to stay as long as he needed, but she recognized the pride in his voice. The same pride that had kept Thomas going through chemotherapy when his body was begging to quit. Some dignity could only be preserved through limits and boundaries and the pretense of temporary arrangements. 1 month, Julia agreed. They shook hands on it, and Julia felt the calluses on Ridge's palm, the rough texture of a man who had worked hard his entire life, felt the way his hand trembled slightly before he steadied it. Ridge stood cradling Lily. "I should get our things from the truck. You've had a long day." Julia had nearly forgotten. Her day had started 12 hours ago with her usual routine. Now it was ending with 2 strangers in her home and a promise made to a dead man finally beginning to be kept. She watched Ridge walk to his truck, an ancient Ford that had seen better decades. He moved with the careful precision of exhaustion, someone running on the last fumes of will. From the truck bed, he pulled a duffel bag, a cardboard box labeled "baby stuff" in careful block letters, and the makeshift crib that had been at the auction. Everything he owned in the world fit in the back of a borrowed truck. Julia helped him carry things inside, her pregnant belly making her movements awkward. Ridge tried to carry everything himself, but she insisted on taking the lighter boxes. They worked in silence, creating a temporary nursery in the guest room upstairs. The room had been Thomas's office before he got too sick to climb stairs. Now it held a bed, a dresser, and empty walls where his diplomas used to hang. Ridge set up the cardboard crib near the window where morning light would come in soft and warm. He arranged Lily's few clothes in the dresser with the same careful precision he brought to everything. Julia watched from the doorway, something shifting in her chest. For the first time in 6 months, the house didn't feel quite so empty. The silence had weight to it now, the kind of silence that comes from people being careful not to disturb each other rather than the silence of complete aloneness. "Thank you," Ridge said, not turning from his task. "For everything today? For seeing us when everyone else looked away." "Thomas would have done the same," Julia said. "Thomas was a better man than most. You knew him well?" Ridge's hand stilled on a tiny onesie. "We met years ago, worked together for a while. Lost touch, the way people do." He turned to face her. "I didn't know he'd gotten married, didn't know he was sick. If I had, I would have been there." The regret in his voice was genuine, and Julia felt tears prick her eyes. He had a way of keeping people at a distance when things got bad. Didn't want to be a burden. "Sounds like Thomas." Ridge smiled, a small, sad expression. "He was always taking care of everyone else. Never let anyone take care of him. That's what killed him," Julia said quietly. "The not asking for help. By the time he admitted he was sick, the cancer was already stage 4. They stood in the comfortable silence of shared grief, 2 people who had loved the same man in different ways and different times. Downstairs, Julia heard her phone ring. The sound was jarring, pulling her back to the present. She excused herself and hurried down, her hand automatically going to her belly as she took the stairs carefully. The caller ID showed her doctor's office. Her heart rate spiked. "Hello? Mrs. Brennan, this is Nancy from Dr. Lahiri's office. I'm calling about your blood pressure readings from yesterday's appointment." Julia had nearly forgotten the routine checkup that had shown her blood pressure creeping upward. 140/90, not dangerously high, but trending in the wrong direction. The doctor wants to see you again in 1 week instead of 2, Nancy continued, and she wants you to monitor your pressure at home daily. Can you come in tomorrow to pick up a home monitor? Yes, Julia said, though her mind was already racing ahead to all the things she needed to do. The library where she worked part-time would need coverage. The groceries she hadn't bought. The preparations for a baby she was trying desperately not to lose. She hung up and stood in the kitchen, one hand on the counter to steady herself. Through the window, she could see the sun had fully set now. The farmland stretched out in darkness, and somewhere in that darkness was the future, uncertain and frightening. Upstairs, she heard Ridge's voice, soft and melodic, singing something without words to Lily. A lullaby that needed no language, just the rise and fall of a voice offering comfort and safety. Julia closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. For the first time since Thomas died, she wasn't the only adult in this house, wasn't the only person keeping vigil against the dark. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt dangerous, like she was letting herself hope again, and hope was the most fragile thing she owned. The next morning came too early, announced by Lily's cries at 5 a.m. Julia woke in her own bed, disoriented for a moment by the sound. Then she remembered. Ridge and Lily. The auction. The promise. She lay still, listening. Ridge's footsteps crossed the floor above her. The crying stopped almost immediately, replaced by his low voice, soothing and certain. The sounds of a bottle being prepared, the creak of the rocking chair Julia had moved into the guest room last night. Julia should go back to sleep, should take advantage of Ridge handling the early morning feeding, but she found herself getting up instead, pulling on a robe, padding quietly up the stairs. The guest room door was open. Inside, Ridge sat in the rocking chair with Lily cradled in his arms, a bottle held at the perfect angle. He hadn't noticed Julia yet. His attention was completely on the baby, his face soft, with an expression that transformed his harsh features into something almost tender. He was shirtless, wearing only a pair of worn jeans, his feet bare against the hardwood floor. In the early morning light coming through the window, Julia could see his body told a story. Scars crisscrossed his torso, old injuries that had healed poorly. His ribs were too prominent, evidence of too many missed meals. But his arms, cradling Lily, were gentle as prayer. Julia must have made a sound because Ridge's head snapped up, his body going tense. "I'm sorry," Julia said quickly. "I heard her crying. I thought maybe you needed help." Ridge's shoulders relaxed marginally. "We're fine. Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I was already awake." Julia stepped into the room, settling on the edge of the bed. "How long have you been up?" "Since about 3. She likes to eat every 2 hours." Ridge said it without complaint, just stating fact. Goes with the territory. Julia watched him feed Lily, watched the practiced competence of his movements. "You're good at this." "Had to learn fast. Hospital only kept her 3 days after birth. Sent her home with me and a pamphlet on infant care." A ghost of a smile. "Figured it out as I went." "That must have been terrifying." "Still is. Every day I wake up afraid I'm going to do something wrong. Drop her, feed her too much or not enough. Not know when to take her to a doctor." Ridge's voice dropped lower. "I keep thinking about how Daniel and Natalie should be the ones doing this, how they wanted it so badly. And here I am, stumbling through it alone." The raw honesty of it struck Julia square in the chest. This was what grief looked like in the daily hours. Not dramatic crying or scenes of anguish, but the quiet terror of doing ordinary things without the people who should be there to help. "You're not alone anymore," Julia said. "I don't know much about babies either, but we can figure it out together." Ridge looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding, an alliance forged not from love or even friendship, but from the simple shared fact of survival. Lily finished her bottle, and Ridge lifted her to his shoulder for burping with the same practiced ease. His hand, broad and calloused, looked impossibly large against her tiny back. "I need to tell you something," Ridge said, not meeting Julia's eyes. "About what happened yesterday at the auction." Julia went still. "Okay." "The man running the auction, the auctioneer. His name is William Stokes. He used to be the county sheriff." Ridge paused. "I don't know if that name means anything to you." It did. It meant everything. William Stokes was Julia's father. The father she hadn't spoken to in 16 years. Not since the night he had arrested Thomas for drunk driving and told Julia she had to choose between her family and the man she loved. She had chosen Thomas, had walked away from her father's house, and never looked back. "He's my father," Julia said quietly. "We're not in contact." Ridge nodded slowly, processing this. He knew. When you bid on us, he saw you raise your paddle. I saw the look on his face. What kind of look? Like he'd been punched, like he wanted to stop you, but couldn't. Ridge adjusted Lily, cradling her against his chest now that she'd been burped. "I thought you should know, in case he shows up here, in case he tries to, I don't know, interfere." Julia's mind raced. Her father had been there, had watched her buy Ridge and Lily, had seen her make a choice that probably looked reckless and dangerous from the outside. And knowing William Stokes, he wouldn't let it rest. He was a man who believed in rules and order and proper procedures. He would see Julia's decision as impulsive at best, dangerous at worst. "Thank you for telling me," Julia said. "I'll handle my father if he becomes a problem. I don't want to cause trouble between you and your family." "You're not causing anything. That trouble has been there for 16 years. Julia stood, suddenly needing movement. "I should make breakfast. You must be starving." She fled downstairs before Ridge could respond, before the weight of everything, Thomas, her father, this strange man and baby now in her home, could crush her completely. In the kitchen, she mechanically began making coffee and scrambling eggs. Her hands shook slightly as she cracked the shells. Through the window, she could see the sun rising over her dead husband's land, painting everything gold. She heard Ridge come downstairs, heard him moving around the living room. When she turned, she saw he had dressed in a fresh shirt and was settling Lily into a makeshift bassinet he'd created from a laundry basket and blankets. "You don't have to do all this," Ridge said, nodding toward the breakfast she was preparing. "I can cook for myself." "I know, but I'm cooking anyway." Julia poured coffee into 2 mugs. "How do you take it? Black? Strong." She handed him a mug, and they stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, 2 wary strangers trying to figure out how to share space. "Can I ask you something?" Julia said. "About Thomas?" Ridge tensed slightly but nodded. "When did you last see him? Before he died?" Ridge looked down into his coffee. 5 years ago, maybe 6. We worked together on a ranch up near Amarillo. Thomas was getting his teaching credentials, working part-time to pay for school. I was drifting, doing ranch work wherever I could find it. "Thomas never taught," Julia said. "He wanted to, but after we got married, he took a job at the feed supply instead. Said it was steadier money." "That sounds like him. Always practical." Ridge's voice held a note of sadness. "We lost touch after I moved on to another job. I tried to find him a few times, but he'd moved, changed numbers. Eventually, I stopped trying." Julia absorbed this, adding it to the growing pile of things she hadn't known about her husband's life before her. "He never mentioned you. Not once in all our years together, only at the very end. Maybe I reminded him of a time he wanted to forget. We weren't. We were both in rough shape back then. Drinking too much, working too hard, running from things instead of dealing with them." The honesty was almost brutal. Julia found herself respecting Ridge more for not trying to paint the past in softer colors. "What were you running from?" she asked. Ridge met her eyes. "The same thing everyone runs from. Disappointment. Failure. The gap between who you wanted to be and who you actually are." Before Julia could respond, there was a sharp knock at the front door. 3 hard raps, official and demanding. Ridge and Julia locked eyes. They both knew, somehow, what was coming. Julia crossed to the door and opened it to find her father standing on her porch. William Stokes looked exactly as she remembered, tall and straight-backed despite his 62 years. His hair had gone completely silver now, and deep lines bracketed his mouth, but his eyes were the same, sharp and assessing and impossible to read. "Julia," he said. His voice was gravel and authority. "Dad," she replied, the word feeling foreign in her mouth after so many years of silence. William's gaze moved past her to Ridge, who had appeared in the living room doorway. The 2 men sized each other up with the wariness of dogs meeting on contested territory. "I'm here about the auction," William said. "About your purchase." It's none of your business. When it involves the safety of my daughter, it becomes my business." William's voice hardened. "You don't know this man. You're pregnant, vulnerable. This is exactly the kind of impulsive decision that what?" Julia cut him off. "That you warned me about 16 years ago when I chose Thomas? You were wrong then, and you're wrong now. Thomas Brennan was a drunk who could have killed someone behind that wheel. Thomas Brennan was a good man who made one mistake and spent the rest of his life making up for it." Julia's voice shook with anger. "He was my husband. He was going to be a father. And you weren't there when he died because you couldn't let go of being right long enough to forgive." The words hung in the air between them, sharp as broken glass. William's face went tight, but Julia saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret that came too late to matter. "I made inquiries about Ridge Crawford," William said, changing tactics. "No steady employment in the past 2 years, no permanent address, no criminal record, but also no references." "I don't need references," Ridge spoke up from behind Julia. "I need a chance. Mrs. Brennan is giving me that chance." "And what happens when you decide you've had enough?" William directed his words at Ridge now. "When caring for an infant gets too hard and you need to move on, what happens to that baby then?" "That won't happen." "How can you be sure?" "Because Lily is my responsibility, my family, the only family I have left." Ridge's voice was hard as iron. "I don't run from family." William studied Ridge for a long moment. Then he turned back to Julia. "I can't stop you. You're an adult. But I'm asking you to be careful, for your sake and for the sake of your unborn child." "I am being careful," Julia said quietly. "I'm choosing to help someone Thomas cared about. I'm choosing to trust instead of assume the worst." The barb hit its mark. William flinched. "If you need anything," he said, already turning away. "If there's any trouble, you call me. I'm still your father whether you want me to be or not." He walked to his truck and drove away, gravel crunching under his tires. Julia stood on the porch until the dust settled, her heart hammering. Ridge appeared beside her, Lily in his arms. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been the reason you fought with your father. You weren't the reason. That fight has been waiting for 16 years. Julia took a shaky breath. "He'll probably have someone watch the house. Make sure you're not dangerous." "Will that be a problem?" "Only if you actually are dangerous." Julia tried for a smile. "I'm not, but I understand if you want me to leave anyway." Julia looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully despite the drama swirling around her. Looked at Ridge, who held her with such careful devotion. Thought about Thomas and his final request and the empty house that didn't feel quite so empty anymore. "You're not leaving," she said firmly. "We made a deal. 1 month." Relief flooded Ridge's face, so profound it was almost painful to witness. They went back inside together, and Julia finished making breakfast while Ridge gave Lily another bottle. They ate in companionable silence, the kind of quiet that comes when words have been said and don't need repeating. After breakfast, Julia drove to Dr. Lahiri's office to pick up the blood pressure monitor. Ridge stayed home with Lily, promising to call if he needed anything. As Julia drove, she caught herself checking her rearview mirror, looking for her father's truck or an unmarked police car. Old habits, old fears. At the doctor's office, Nancy walked her through how to use the monitor. Twice a day, morning and night. Keep a log. If you see anything above 140/90, call us immediately. Julia nodded, adding this to the growing list of things she needed to worry about. As if the list wasn't already long enough. She drove home through town, past the high school where she and Thomas had met, past the hospital where he had died, past all the landmarks of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. When she pulled into her driveway, she saw Ridge on the porch, working on the front door that had stuck in its frame since last winter. He had Lily in a sling against his chest, the baby sleeping soundly while he worked. His movements were efficient, competent, the work of someone who knew his way around tools and repairs. Julia sat in her car for a moment, just watching. This man she didn't know, fixing her house, caring for an orphaned baby, fitting into her life with an ease that should have felt wrong but somehow didn't. She thought about Thomas's final words. Don't turn him away. As if Thomas had known. As if he had seen something Julia was only beginning to understand. That sometimes salvation comes not from grand gestures, but from small acts of mutual dependence. From strangers learning to trust each other, one breakfast, one bottle feeding, one repaired door at a time. Julia got out of the car and walked up the porch steps. Ridge looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. Door should work better now, he said. The frame was swollen from humidity. I shaved it down. Thank you. It's the least I can do. They stood there for a moment, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders, Lily breathing softly between them. Ridge, Julia said. Yeah? I'm glad you're here. It was a simple truth, but it felt revolutionary. Ridge's expression softened into something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Me too, he said quietly. And for the first time in 6 months, Julia felt something other than grief. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was possibility. It was hope in its most fragile, tentative form. It was enough to keep breathing for one more day. 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Ridge woke with Lily's first cry, usually around 5 a.m. Julia would wake to the sounds of him moving around upstairs, the soft creak of the rocking chair, his voice singing wordless lullabies. By the time she came downstairs, coffee would already be brewing. Ridge had insisted on taking over morning coffee duty, saying it was the least he could do. They would eat breakfast together in companionable silence. Then Ridge would head out to work on repairs around the property, while Julia handled her library shifts or doctor's appointments. Lily divided her time between them, learning to settle in either set of arms, her trust as universal as any infant's. On the surface, it looked like a functional arrangement. 2 adults cooperating to meet each other's needs. But underneath, something else was building. Something neither of them was quite ready to name. On the 4th morning, everything changed. Julia was washing dishes from breakfast when she heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the window, she saw a white sedan with county plates. Her stomach dropped. A woman in her late 30s stepped out, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of efficient expression that Julia had learned to recognize. Social worker, Child Protective Services. Ridge, Julia called up the stairs, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. We have company. Ridge appeared at the top of the stairs, Lily in his arms. He saw the car through the window and went very still. CPS. The knock came firm and professional. Julia wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find a woman with shoulder-length black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Mrs. Brennan, I'm Vanessa Ruiz from Child Protective Services. May I come in? Julia stepped aside, her heart hammering. Vanessa entered and immediately catalogued everything. The cleanliness of the house, Ridge standing at the top of the stairs, the baby in his arms. Mr. Crawford, Vanessa said, I need to speak with you about Lily. Ridge came down the stairs slowly, his expression guarded. What about her? We received a report that a 10-day-old infant is being cared for by someone who has no legal guardianship and no stable housing situation. Vanessa pulled out papers from her clipboard. I'm here to assess the situation and ensure the child's welfare. Who reported it? Julia asked, though she already knew. Her father. Of course it was her father. I can't disclose that information. Vanessa's tone was professional, but not unkind. But I need to verify some facts. Mr. Crawford, you're claiming to be Lily's uncle? I am her uncle, Ridge said carefully. Do you have documentation proving your relationship? Lily's birth certificate lists Daniel Crawford as father and Natalie Crawford as mother. They were my brother and sister-in-law. And do you have legal guardianship papers? The silence that followed was damning. No, Ridge admitted. Daniel and Natalie died before they could complete the legal documents. I have a letter from Natalie, written before she gave birth, stating her wish for me to care for Lily if anything happened to them. But it's not notarized, not legally binding. Vanessa made notes on her clipboard. And Mrs. Brennan, what is your relationship to the child? I'm helping Ridge care for her. Are you related to the child in any way? No. More notes, more assessments. Vanessa's face gave nothing away. I need to be honest with both of you, she said finally. This situation is highly irregular. Mr. Crawford, without legal guardianship, you technically have no more right to this child than any other stranger. And Mrs. Brennan, while I appreciate your willingness to help, you're not a licensed foster parent. So what are you saying? Ridge's voice was tight, controlled. I'm saying that I need to open an investigation. You'll have 30 days to establish legal guardianship, or Lily will need to be placed in the foster care system while the courts sort out permanent placement. No. The word came out of Ridge like a growl. You're not taking her. Mr. Crawford, I understand this is difficult, but you don't understand anything. Ridge backed up a step, his arms tightening protectively around Lily. This baby has already lost both her parents. You want to rip her away from the only family she has left and stick her with strangers? I want to ensure she's in a safe, stable environment with proper legal protections. She is safe. She is stable. We're giving her everything she needs. Vanessa's expression softened slightly, the professional mask cracking just enough to show the human underneath. I can see that you care for her. I can see that she's clean, fed, obviously loved, but the law is clear. Without legal documentation, I have to follow protocol. Julia stepped forward. What if I became a licensed foster parent? Would that change things? Vanessa turned to her. The licensing process takes time. Background checks, home studies, training. We're talking weeks, possibly months. But if I started the process, could Lily stay here during that time? Possibly, if Mr. Crawford can demonstrate stable employment and proper child care arrangements. Vanessa looked between them. You'd both need to cooperate with regular home visits, complete transparency, any hint that the child is in danger, and she gets removed immediately. Is that clear? Crystal, Julia said. And Mr. Crawford would need to file for formal guardianship, get the court proceedings started. Ridge nodded, his jaw tight. Vanessa made more notes, then pulled out a card. This is my direct line. I'll be back next week for the first official home visit. In the meantime, Mrs. Brennan, contact the licensing office tomorrow morning to start your application. Mr. Crawford, find a family law attorney and get guardianship papers filed. She handed them each a copy of the case file number. I want to be clear. I'm not the enemy here. I've seen too many children suffer because the system failed them. But I've also seen well-meaning people get in over their heads. My job is to make sure Lily gets the best outcome possible. Understood, Julia said. After Vanessa left, Julia and Ridge stood in the living room, the weight of the 30-day deadline pressing down on them like a physical thing. Ridge slowly sank onto the couch, still holding Lily. His hands were shaking. I can't lose her, he whispered. I can't. Julia sat beside him. You won't. We'll figure this out. How? I don't have money for a lawyer, don't have proof of stable employment, don't have anything except a borrowed truck and a cardboard crib. You have me, Julia said. And you have time. 30 days. Ridge looked at her and she saw the fear in his eyes, raw and real. Why are you doing this? Really? You could walk away right now. Let CPS handle it. It would be easier. Julia thought about Thomas, about promise and purpose, about the way her empty house had started to feel like home again with Ridge and Lily in it, about the possibility that sometimes helping someone else was the only way to save yourself. Because, she said quietly, I think we're supposed to save each other. Ridge held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, something settling in his expression. Determination replacing despair. Okay, he said. 30 days. We can do this. But as Julia went upstairs to take her blood pressure reading, her hands were shaking too. The monitor beeped. 150/95, higher than it had ever been. She wrote the number in her log and said nothing. The clock had been counting down for 7 days. 23 days remained until Vanessa Ruiz would return for her evaluation, and Ridge Crawford had learned that time moved differently when you were desperate. Hours stretched into infinity during Lily's fussy evenings, but entire days vanished like smoke when he looked at the calendar. He had found work at the Double H Ranch, 15 miles outside of town. The owner, Hank Morrison, was a weathered man in his 50s who had known Thomas Brennan years ago. When Ridge showed up asking for work, Hank had studied him with eyes that had seen too many drifters to be easily fooled. "Thomas mentioned you once," Hank had said, leaning against a fence post. "Said you were the best hand with cattle he'd ever seen. Said you were also too stubborn for your own good." Ridge had taken the compliment and the criticism in equal measure. "I need steady work. Full-time if you have it." Hank had nodded slowly, considering. "I can give you 6 days a week, dawn to dusk. Pay is fair, but not generous. You'd be handling cattle, mending fences, whatever needs doing." He paused. "Thomas also said you were reliable. That true?" "Yes, sir." "Then you start Monday." That had been 6 days ago. Now Ridge woke every morning at 4:30, fed Lily her first bottle, and was in his truck by 5:15 to make the drive to the Double H. He worked until 6 in the evening, his body remembering the rhythms of ranch work even after 2 years of drifting from job to job. Fence posts and cattle and the endless Texas sky. Julia watched Lily during the day while Ridge worked. She had cut back her library hours to 2 days a week, claiming she needed rest because of the pregnancy. Ridge suspected it had more to do with giving him time to establish stable employment, but he didn't argue. He was learning that Julia Brennan helped people quietly, without making a show of her generosity. They had fallen into a routine that felt almost normal. Ridge would return from work exhausted and covered in dust. Julia would have dinner ready, simple meals from her grandmother's recipe cards, meatloaf and roasted chicken and casseroles that stretched to feed them both. They would eat together at the kitchen table while Lily dozed in her bassinet, talking about their days in the careful way of people learning to share space. After dinner, Ridge would take over Lily's care completely. Baths in the kitchen sink, bottles warmed to exactly the right temperature, the endless cycle of feeding and changing and soothing. Julia would sit in Thomas's chair with her laptop, working on the foster care licensing application that seemed to require documenting her entire existence. Sometimes they would sit in the same room without speaking, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Ridge would hold Lily and hum wordless tunes while Julia filled out forms. The house would settle around them, creaking in the evening heat, and for brief moments Ridge could almost forget the countdown, the threat, the fragility of everything they were building. But the reminder always came. Tonight, it came in the form of Julia's sharp intake of breath. Ridge looked up from Lily to find Julia staring at her laptop screen, her face drained of color. "What's wrong?" he asked. Julia turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a section of the foster care application titled Household Members and Background Checks. The instructions were clear. All adults living in the home must submit to criminal background checks, provide employment history, and list all previous addresses for the past 10 years. "I can do all of that," Ridge said, not understanding the problem. "Look at the next section." He read further. "All household members must disclose any biological relationships to children in the home or seeking placement." Ridge's blood went cold. "They're going to ask if you're related to Lily," Julia said quietly. "And if you say you're her uncle, they're going to verify it. Birth certificates, family trees, documentation." Ridge set Lily carefully in her bassinet and stood, needing movement. He walked to the window and stared out at the dark farmland. Behind him, he could feel Julia waiting. "Ridge?" Her voice was gentle. "Is there something you need to tell me?" He could lie. He had been lying for 10 days now, and it had become almost natural. Uncle, brother's child, the story he had told at the auction, told Vanessa Ruiz, told Julia herself. But standing in this house that smelled like lavender and lemon oil, in this home that Julia had opened to him without question, the lie suddenly felt unbearable. "Lily isn't my niece," Ridge said without turning around. The silence behind him was absolute. "Then who is she?" Julia's voice had changed, gone careful and controlled. Ridge turned to face her. Julia sat very still in Thomas's chair, her hands folded over her pregnant belly, her eyes wide with something between confusion and fear. "She's my daughter," Ridge said. "Biologically. Lily is my biological daughter." Julia stood up slowly, like someone who had just been told the ground beneath their feet might not be solid. "Your daughter. Daniel's wife, Natalie, she was pregnant with your child?" "It's not like that." Ridge ran a hand through his hair, trying to find words for a truth he had never wanted to speak out loud. Daniel and Natalie, they tried for years to have a baby, went through testing, found out Daniel was infertile. They couldn't afford IVF, couldn't afford adoption. He paused, the memory of that conversation still sharp after 2 years. Daniel in the barn, broken and desperate, asking the impossible. Daniel asked me to help them, Ridge continued. Sperm donation, artificial insemination, not IVF, cheaper. They said the baby would still be family, still be Crawford blood. They begged me. Julia sank back into the chair. So you agreed. I didn't want to. I knew it was complicated, knew it could cause problems, but Daniel was my brother, my only family, and Natalie, she wanted a child so badly. Ridge's voice cracked. I thought I was helping them, thought I was doing something good. But the baby, Lily, she's legally yours. No, legally she's Daniel's. They did the procedure through a clinic, signed papers saying Daniel would be the legal father. I signed away all parental rights. It was supposed to be clean, simple, anonymous. Julia's eyes narrowed. But the birth certificate Vanessa saw, it listed Daniel as the father, because that's who the father was, in every way that mattered. Daniel was Lily's father. He and Natalie raised her from the moment she was born. I was just the biology. Until they died. Ridge nodded. Until they died. And then suddenly I was the only one left. And I couldn't let her go into the system, couldn't let strangers raise my brother's daughter. Your daughter, Julia corrected, and there was something sharp in her voice now. No, Daniel's daughter. I promised them, Julia. I promised I would never tell Lily, never claim her. She was supposed to grow up thinking Daniel was her biological father. But Daniel is dead. Julia stood again, pacing now. And you've been lying to me, to CPS, to everyone. To protect Lily. Or to protect yourself. Julia whirled to face him. You knew that if you told the truth, if you admitted you were her biological father, it would change everything. The guardianship case, the custody proceedings, all of it. Ridge felt anger flare in his chest, hot and defensive. You think I kept this secret for myself? I kept it because telling the truth would destroy everything Daniel and Natalie wanted, would make their daughter question her entire existence. Lily is 10 days old. She doesn't have an existence to question yet. But she will. And when she's old enough to understand, I don't want her to think her parents weren't really her parents, that she was some kind of transaction. She's not a transaction. Julia's voice rose. She's a child who deserves to know the truth about where she came from. She deserves to know that her parents loved her, that they wanted her. That's the only truth that matters. They stared at each other across the living room, Lily sleeping peacefully between them, unaware that the adults in her life were fracturing. Julia spoke first, her voice deadly quiet. How long were you going to keep lying to me? I don't know. Forever, maybe. Forever. Julia laughed, but there was no humor in it. We're going before CPS in 3 weeks. They're going to dig into every detail of your life, of Lily's parentage, of everything. Did you really think you could hide this? I hoped, we could get through the evaluation without it coming up. That's not hoping, Ridge, that's delusion. Julia pressed her hands to her temples. Do you understand what you've done? You've made me complicit in your lie. I've been telling CPS that you're Lily's uncle. I've been vouching for you based on information that's false. The information isn't false. I am her uncle. I raised her with Daniel and Natalie for the first days of her life. But you're also her father, and that's the part that matters legally. Ridge wanted to argue, wanted to make her understand, but the words died in his throat. Because she was right. He had been lying. And now Julia, who had trusted him, who had opened her home to him, was facing consequences for his deception. I'm sorry, he said. I should have told you from the beginning. Yes, you should have. Julia moved to the stairs. I need to think. I need to be alone. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, the other on her belly. Ridge watched her go and felt something collapse inside his chest. He looked down at Lily, still sleeping, innocent and trusting. She had no idea her existence was built on secrets and compromises, had no idea that the man holding her was drowning in guilt. Ridge picked her up carefully and carried her upstairs to the guest room. He changed her diaper, fed her a bottle, sang her the wordless lullaby that always calmed her. All the while, his mind raced through possibilities and consequences. If he came clean to CPS, if he admitted he was Lily's biological father, would that help or hurt his case? Would it prove he had a right to her, or would it prove he was willing to lie to authorities? Would Julia forgive him, or would she throw him out? And underneath all those questions was one that terrified him most. Was he a father or an uncle? Was Lily his daughter or his brother's? He didn't know anymore. Lily fell asleep in his arms, her tiny hand curled around his finger. Ridge sat in the rocking chair and held her, this child who was both his and not his, this beautiful complication that had upended his entire life. Downstairs, he heard Julia moving around, heard her voice, muffled, talking to someone on the phone. He strained to hear but couldn't make out the words. An hour later, there was a soft knock on his door. Julia stood in the hallway, her eyes red but her voice steady. "I called my sister Linda," she said. "Asked her advice." Ridge waited. "She reminded me that people make mistakes, that good people make terrible choices for complicated reasons." Julia leaned against the doorframe. "She also reminded me that I made a promise to Thomas, that I committed to helping you. You don't owe me anything, not after what I've done. No, I don't owe you, but I owe Thomas, and I owe myself." Julia came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "I need you to understand something, Ridge. I can forgive the lie. I can understand why you kept the secret, but I can't help you if you keep lying. Not to me, not to CPS, not to anyone. You want me to tell them the truth. I want you to stop running from it." Julia's voice gentled. "You're Lily's father. That's not a curse, that's a gift. And hiding it, being ashamed of it, that's what's going to destroy your case, not the truth itself." Ridge looked down at Lily. "What if the truth makes everything worse? What if it makes everything better?" Julia countered. "What if being honest is exactly what CPS needs to see, that you're a father willing to sacrifice your pride, your privacy, everything, to keep your daughter safe?" The word daughter hit Ridge like a physical blow. He had spent so long thinking of Lily as Daniel's daughter that hearing someone call her his felt revolutionary. "I don't know how to be a father," he whispered. "Neither does any man before he becomes one." Julia stood and moved to the door. "But you've been doing it for 10 days now, feeding her, changing her, loving her. That's what fathers do." She left him alone with Lily and his thoughts. Ridge sat in the dark, rocking slowly, trying to imagine a world where he could claim Lily as his daughter without betraying Daniel's memory, trying to imagine a world where the truth set him free instead of destroying everything. He was still sitting there when dawn broke. The next 3 days passed in a strange, tense peace. Julia and Ridge moved around each other carefully, like people navigating a room full of broken glass. They were polite, functional, cooperative. But the easy comfort they had been building was gone, replaced by the weight of Ridge's secret. Julia threw herself into the foster care application with fierce determination. She scheduled the required background check, began the mandatory training modules, arranged for a home study. She worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and stubbornness, determined to build a legal foundation that couldn't be questioned. Ridge worked at the Double H from dawn to dusk, pushing his body until exhaustion made thinking impossible. Hank Morrison noticed the change in him, the driven intensity that bordered on self-destruction. "You trying to work yourself to death?" Hank asked on the third day, watching Ridge repair a fence in the brutal afternoon heat. "Just trying to earn my keep." "You've earned more than your keep. You've done the work of 2 men this week." Hank handed him a bottle of water. "But a man who works like he's being chased, that's a man running from something." Ridge drank the water, grateful for the momentary pause. "I'm not running." "Could have fooled me." Hank leaned against the fence post. "Thomas used to work like that. When Julia, was having trouble getting pregnant, he'd come out here and work until he couldn't stand. Like if he pushed hard enough, he could fix things." Ridge looked up sharply. "Julia had trouble getting pregnant?" "For years. They tried everything. Treatments, specialists, spent money they didn't have. It nearly broke them." Hank's voice was quiet. "Then Thomas got his diagnosis, stage 4. And all those years of trying suddenly felt, I don't know, cruel maybe, like they'd been fighting the wrong battle." "I didn't know." Course you didn't. Thomas kept things private. Hank pushed off the fence. Point is, Julia understands loss, understands fighting for something that might never happen. So whatever you're running from, whatever you're scared of, she's probably the best person you could have in your corner. Ridge absorbed this, adding it to the growing pile of things he didn't know about Julia Brennan. Her marriage, her struggles, the depth of grief she carried with such quiet grace. That evening, when he returned to the farmhouse, he found Julia on the porch swing, her laptop balanced on her knees. She looked up when his truck pulled in, and for the first time in 3 days, she smiled. "How was work?" she asked. "Long. Hot. Good." Ridge climbed the porch steps, suddenly aware of how dusty and sweat-stained he was. "How was your day?" "Productive. I finished the initial training modules for foster care licensing, and I scheduled the home study for next week." Ridge nodded, processing this. "That's good? That's really good?" They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Then Julia set aside her laptop and patted the space beside her on the swing. "Sit with me for a minute." Ridge hesitated, then sat, careful to leave space between them. The swing creaked gently as it moved. "I've been thinking about what you told me," Julia said. "About Lily. About Daniel and Natalie." Ridge tensed, bracing for judgment or anger. "And I think I understand now why you made the choice you did, to help them, to give them what they wanted most." Julia looked out at the darkening fields. "I know what it's like to want a child so badly it hurts, to feel like your body is betraying you, to watch everyone around you have what comes so easily and wonder why you can't." "Hank told me," Ridge said quietly, "about you and Thomas, the fertility treatments. Then you know what it does to a person, the hope and the disappointment and the desperate measures." Julia's hand moved to her belly. "When I finally got pregnant, 6 months after Thomas died, it felt like a miracle, like he'd left me this one perfect gift. That's what Daniel said when Natalie got pregnant with Lily. He said it was a miracle." Ridge's voice was rough with memory. "He cried when I told him I'd help, actually cried, said I was giving him everything he'd ever wanted." "So you did it for him." "I did it for both of them, for the family they were trying to build." Ridge paused. "I didn't think about what would happen if they weren't there to raise her. Didn't think I'd end up being the one, being her father," Julia finished gently. Ridge nodded, the acknowledgement still difficult. They rocked in silence for a while, the evening settling around them. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Closer, crickets began their nightly chorus. "I need to tell you something," Julia said, "about my pregnancy." Ridge looked at her, noting for the first time how tired she looked, how her hands trembled slightly as she folded them over her belly. "I have a condition called preeclampsia, high blood pressure that can become dangerous. My doctor has me monitoring it twice a day." She took a breath. "The numbers have been climbing. The stress of everything, it's not helping." Guilt crashed over Ridge like a wave. "I'm making you sick." "No. Life is making me sick. Grief and fear and uncertainty. You're not the cause of that." Julia met his eyes. "But I need you to understand that I can't. I can't keep carrying secrets. Can't keep wondering what else you haven't told me. I need honesty, Ridge. Complete honesty, because my baby's life might depend on it." The stakes had just become impossibly higher. Ridge nodded slowly. "No more secrets, I promise." "Good." Julia stood carefully. "Because I have a plan for how to handle Vanessa's next visit. But it requires you to be completely honest with her, with everyone." "What kind of plan?" "The kind where we stop trying to hide what you are and start proving you're exactly what Lily needs." Julia's voice was firm. "You're her father, so let's make the case that you're a damn good one." Ridge felt something shift in his chest. Permission, maybe, or absolution. The weight of pretending to be less than he was, less connected to Lily than he felt, had been crushing him. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it." They went inside together, and for the first time since his confession, the air between them felt clear. But that clarity wouldn't last. At 11 that night, Julia's phone rang. She was in bed, one hand on her belly where the baby kicked, when she saw the caller ID. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something made her pick up. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was female, rough with cigarettes and bitterness. "Julia Brennan?" "Yes." "Who is this?" "My name is Sarah Crawford. I'm Ridge's mother." Julia sat up sharply, her heart beginning to race. His mother? That's right. The mother he probably told you abandoned him and Daniel when they were kids. The mother who wasn't there when Daniel died. Sarah's laugh was harsh. "I bet he didn't mention me at all, did he?" "No," Julia admitted. "Typical. Ridge always was good at pretending people didn't exist when they disappointed him." There was a pause, the sound of a lighter flicking. "I'm calling because I know he's living with you. Know he has Lily." "How do you know that? Small county. Word travels fast at the church social hour. Your neighbor, Mrs. Chen, she mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to me. Plus, I've been keeping tabs on my boys for years, even if they didn't want me around." Julia's mind raced. "What do you want?" "I want to meet my granddaughter. I want to see Ridge. And I want you to give him a message." Sarah's voice hardened. "Tell him he has 7 days to come clean about Lily's parentage. Tell him to tell you the whole truth, not just the parts that make him look noble." "I already know about Lily," Julia said. "He told me." "Did he tell you about the fight? About what happened the night before Daniel and Natalie died?" Julia went cold. "What fight?" "Ask him. And tell him if he doesn't come clean, if he doesn't tell you everything, I'll tell CPS myself. I'll make sure they know every detail of how Lily came to be, every complication, every secret." "Why would you do that to your own son?" "Because secrets destroy families, Mrs. Brennan. I learned that the hard way. And I won't let Ridge make the same mistakes I did." Sarah's voice softened just slightly. 7 days. Tell him." The line went dead. Julia sat in the dark, her hands shaking, her mind spinning. What fight? What hadn't Ridge told her? She wanted to march downstairs and confront him immediately, wanted to demand the truth, the whole truth right now. But her blood pressure monitor sat on the nightstand, a reminder of her fragility. Her baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing her distress. Julia took a deep breath, then another, forced herself to lie back down. 7 days. She would give Ridge 7 days to tell her himself. And if he didn't, if he kept one more secret, she would make him leave. The baby's life in her womb depended on peace, and Ridge Crawford was bringing nothing but chaos. Downstairs, Ridge sat in the dark living room, holding Lily and staring at his phone. He had 3 missed calls from a number he hadn't seen in 5 years. His mother's number. He deleted the voicemails without listening to them. Some ghosts were better left buried. But as Lily slept in his arms, Ridge felt the past creeping closer, felt the foundation of his careful lies beginning to crack. The truth was coming whether he was ready or not, and when it arrived, it would destroy everything. The days after Sarah Crawford's phone call moved with the slow, inexorable quality of a storm building on the horizon. Julia watched Ridge carefully, waiting for him to mention his mother, waiting for him to tell her about the fight Sarah had referenced. But Ridge said nothing. He worked his shifts at the Double H, came home exhausted, cared for Lily with quiet devotion, and kept his secrets locked behind blue eyes that had learned not to reveal too much. 5 days remained on Sarah's deadline when Julia's body made the decision for her. She woke at 3 in the morning with a headache that felt like her skull was being crushed in a vice. The room spun when she tried to sit up. Her vision blurred at the edges, dark spots dancing across her field of view. She reached for the blood pressure monitor on her nightstand with trembling hands, wrapped the cuff around her arm, pressed start. The numbers appeared on the screen like an accusation. 170 over 110. Dangerously high. Emergency high. Julia tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She collapsed back onto the bed, her hand instinctively going to her belly. The baby kicked weakly, as if he too was struggling. "Ridge," she called out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She tried again, louder this time. "Ridge!" She heard his door open upstairs, heard his footsteps on the stairs, quick and urgent. He appeared in her doorway, shirtless and alarmed, Lily cradled in one arm. "Julia, what's wrong?" "Blood pressure," she managed. "Too high. Need hospital." Ridge's face went white. He placed Lily gently in her bassinet, then was at Julia's side, helping her sit up, supporting her weight. "Can you walk?" I don't know. I'm calling an ambulance. No time. Just get me to the truck. Ridge didn't argue. He wrapped one arm around her waist, taking most of her weight, and half-carried her toward the front door. With his free hand, he grabbed his keys and phone from the table. "Lily," Julia said weakly, "we can't leave her. She's coming with us." Ridge's voice was tight with controlled panic. He settled Julia in the passenger seat, then ran back inside for Lily, bringing her out still sleeping in her car seat. He secured her in the back with shaking hands, then climbed behind the wheel. The drive to Collier County Hospital took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Julia leaned against the window, trying to breathe through the pain in her head, trying not to think about all the things that could be going wrong with her baby. Ridge drove with terrifying focus, his jaw clenched, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. At one point, Lily woke and began to cry. Ridge reached back blindly and found her tiny hand, and somehow that contact was enough. She quieted, her trust in him absolute. Julia watched this through her haze of pain and thought, "He's a good father. Whatever else is true, that's true." The emergency room entrance blazed with light. Ridge pulled up to the doors and was out of the truck before the engine fully stopped. He yanked open Julia's door and caught her as she tried to step down, her legs buckling. "Help!" Ridge shouted toward the entrance. "I need help!" Two nurses came running with a wheelchair. They got Julia into it, asking rapid-fire questions. How far along? When did the symptoms start? Any bleeding? Any contractions? Ridge answered what he could while grabbing Lily's car seat from the back. He followed the nurses inside. This man who had walked into Julia's life less than 3 weeks ago, now running beside her wheelchair like his own life depended on her survival. They swept Julia into a trauma bay. Monitors were attached, IV lines inserted. Dr. Lahiri appeared, summoned from home, her face grave as she reviewed the numbers. "Severe preeclampsia," she said. "Possibly progressing to eclampsia. We need to deliver this baby. Now." Julia's hand shot out, gripping the doctor's wrist. "It's too early. He's only 32 weeks. And he won't survive if we don't get him out. Neither will you." Dr. Lahiri's voice was gentle but unyielding. "Your blood pressure is continuing to climb. You're at risk for seizures, stroke, organ failure. We have a good NICU. 32 weeks, the baby has excellent odds." "But not certain," Julia whispered. "Nothing in medicine is certain. But I'm certain that waiting will kill you both." Ridge appeared at Julia's other side. Somewhere in the chaos, a nurse had taken Lily, promising to watch her. He took Julia's free hand in his. "Do it," Ridge said. "Save them both." Julia looked up at him, this man she barely knew but had come to depend on. "If something happens to me, you take care of both babies." "You're going to make it," Ridge said firmly. "But if I don't, swear you'll raise them, Thomas and Lily. Both of them." His throat worked. "I swear it, on everything." They wheeled her toward the operating room. The last thing Julia saw before the anesthesia pulled her under was Ridge's face, terrified and determined in equal measure. Then there was nothing. Ridge stood outside the operating room for what felt like a lifetime, holding Lily and trying not to fall apart. The nurse who had taken her returned to check on him, found him pacing like a caged animal. "You should sit down," she said kindly. "It's going to be a while." "How long?" "C-section usually takes about an hour, but with complications could be longer." Ridge nodded numbly and forced himself to sit. Lily had fallen back asleep in her car seat, blissfully unaware that the woman who had saved them both might be dying 3 rooms away. The waiting room was eerily quiet at 4 a.m. Just Ridge, a janitor mopping floors in the distance, and the relentless tick of the wall clock. Ridge's phone buzzed, a text from Hank Morrison. "Heard you left in a hurry. Everything okay?" Word traveled fast in small counties. Ridge texted back with numb fingers. "Julia in surgery. Baby coming early. Will update when I know more." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "I'm coming. Be there in 20. Ridge wanted to tell him not to, that it wasn't necessary, but the truth was he needed someone, needed to not be alone with his fear and guilt, because this was his fault. The stress he'd brought into Julia's life, the secrets, the complications, they had done this. Her body was shutting down because of him. If she died, Her blood would be on his hands. At 4:30, Vanessa Ruiz walked into the waiting room. She was in street clothes, not her usual professional attire, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Ridge looked up in surprise. "How did you know?" "Small county," Vanessa said, echoing what Sarah had told Julia. "My brother works ER intake. He called when he saw Julia Brennan come in critical." She sat down next to him. "How is she?" "In surgery, emergency C-section." Ridge's voice was flat, all emotion locked down tight. "They said her blood pressure was dangerously high." Vanessa glanced at Lily. "And you brought the baby?" "Couldn't leave her alone." "That's good. That's what a parent does." Vanessa leaned back in her chair. "Ridge, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Ridge braced himself. "Are you Lily's biological father?" The question hung in the air between them, sharp as a scalpel. Ridge could lie, could maintain the fiction. But sitting in this hospital at 4:30 in the morning, waiting to find out if Julia would survive, he was suddenly too tired for deception. "Yes," he said simply. Vanessa nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" "Because I promised my brother I'd never claim her. Because Daniel and Natalie were her real parents, the ones who wanted her, who planned for her. I was just biology. Biology matters in custody cases. I know." Ridge looked at Lily, sleeping so peacefully. "But I didn't want her to grow up thinking she was, I don't know, unwanted. A second choice. Daniel loved her. Natalie loved her. That's what should matter. It does matter, but so does the truth." Vanessa pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app. "Tell me everything, the whole story. How Lily came to be, what Daniel and Natalie wanted, what happened the night they died. All of it." So Ridge told her about Daniel's infertility, about the desperate request, about the clinic and the paperwork and the agreement that Ridge would be an uncle, nothing more, about the pregnancy and the joy on Daniel's face when Lily was born, about how Ridge had held her in the hospital and felt nothing but gratitude that his brother finally had what he'd always wanted. "And then they died," Vanessa said quietly. "Car accident 3 weeks ago." Ridge's voice roughened. "I was at the house when the police came. I was watching Lily while they went to a doctor's appointment. And then suddenly they were gone, and I was all she had left. So you took her. I couldn't let her go into the system. Couldn't let strangers raise her when I was right there." Vanessa made notes, her face unreadable. "Did Daniel and Natalie have a will? Any legal documents naming you as guardian?" "Natalie wrote a letter before Lily was born, saying if anything happened, she wanted me to raise her daughter. But it wasn't notarized, wasn't legally binding." "Do you still have it?" Ridge nodded. "In my truck. I can get it. In a minute." Vanessa set down her phone. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand I'm breaking protocol by doing this." Ridge waited, hardly daring to breathe. "I was married once, had a daughter, beautiful little girl named Maya." Vanessa's voice went soft with old pain. "When my husband and I divorced, he fought for custody, said I worked too much, wasn't around enough. The court agreed. They gave him primary custody, and I got every other weekend. I'm sorry. Maya's 8 now, and she barely knows me, calls his new wife Mom, and treats me like a friendly stranger." Vanessa looked directly at Ridge. "I tell you this because I understand what it's like when the system decides you're not the right parent, when paperwork and precedent matter more than love." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've seen your file, seen the way you care for Lily, and I've seen Julia's application for foster care licensing, seen the stable home she's trying to build." Vanessa leaned forward. "The system says you should lose Lily because you don't have the right documentation, but I don't think the system is always right." Hope flickered in Ridge's chest, fragile and terrifying. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I file my report, I'm going to recommend that you retain custody, that Julia's home be approved for foster placement pending her licensing completion, that Lily remain where she is." Ridge felt his throat close up. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've made too many decisions based on rules instead of reality, and I'm tired of children suffering for it." Vanessa stood. "But Ridge, you have to be completely honest from here on out. No more secrets. No more hiding. If you want to keep Lily, you have to claim her, publicly, legally, as your daughter." "I don't know if I can do that. Don't know if I have the right." "You have every right. You're her father, and from what I've seen, you're a good one." Before Ridge could respond, the operating room doors opened. Dr. Lahiri emerged, still in surgical scrubs, pulling down her mask. Ridge was on his feet instantly. "How is she?" Dr. Lahiri smiled, and Ridge felt his knees go weak with relief. "She's going to be fine. The baby, too. A boy, 3 pounds, 8 ounces. Small but strong. He's in the NICU, and they're optimistic about his prognosis." "And Julia?" "Stable. The blood pressure came down as soon as we delivered. She's in recovery now. You can see her in about an hour." Ridge sat down hard, all the tension draining out of him at once. Beside him, Vanessa squeezed his shoulder. "See?" she said quietly. "Sometimes things work out." Hank Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, bringing coffee and the kind of steady presence that came from decades of weathering crises. He sat with Ridge while Vanessa left to file her report, while the sun came up outside the hospital windows, while the world slowly shifted from night to morning. "You look like hell," Hank observed. "Feel worse." Ridge accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thank you for coming. Thomas would have done the same for me, and Julia, she's good people. Glad she's going to be okay." Hank nodded toward Lily. "That little one, too. You've got yourself quite a family there." "They're not my family." "Not really. I'm just helping." "That's what family does. Helps when it's needed." Hank sipped his coffee. "Thomas used to say that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when things fall apart." Ridge thought about Julia, who had shown up at an auction and changed his life. Thought about Lily, who he'd promised to protect even when he had nothing to offer. Thought about the baby boy upstairs in the NICU, Thomas's son, who Ridge had just promised Julia he'd help raise. Maybe Hank was right. Maybe this was family, built not from biology but from choice and circumstance and desperate need. An hour later, a nurse came to get him. "Mrs. Brennan is asking for you." Ridge followed her to recovery, carrying Lily. Julia lay in a hospital bed, pale but conscious, her eyes finding his the moment he entered. "You're alive," she said, her voice hoarse from intubation. "So are you." Ridge moved to her bedside, set Lily's car seat down carefully. "They said the baby, your son, he's doing well." "I know. They showed me a picture." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "He's so small, Ridge, so tiny and fragile." "He's a fighter, like his mother." Julia laughed weakly. "I don't feel like a fighter. I feel like I almost died." "But you didn't." Ridge took her hand. "You're here. The baby's here. That's what matters." Julia squeezed his hand, then her expression shifted to something more serious. "I need to tell you something about why my blood pressure spiked so badly." Ridge tensed. "Okay." "Your mother called me 4 days ago." Julia watched his face carefully. "She said she wanted to meet Lily. And she said if you didn't tell me the whole truth about what happened before Daniel and Natalie died, she would tell CPS herself." Ridge went very still. "What did she say happened?" "She mentioned a fight. The night before the accident." Julia's grip on his hand tightened. "She said there were secrets you weren't telling me. Was she right?" Ridge wanted to pull away, wanted to retreat behind his walls, but Julia's hand held him fast. And after everything, after she'd nearly died because of the stress he'd brought into her life, she deserved the truth. All of it. "There was a fight," Ridge admitted. "Daniel called me the night before he died. He was drunk, angry, said he'd been thinking about Lily, about how she was mine biologically, and he couldn't stop wondering if I resented him, if I wanted to take her back." Julia waited, silent. "I told him he was being ridiculous, that Lily was his daughter, that I had no claim to her and didn't want one, but he kept pushing, kept saying he saw the way I looked at her, the way I held her, said he thought I was in love with Natalie, that the whole donation thing was just an excuse to be with her in some way." "Were you?" Julia asked quietly. "In love with Natalie? No, God, no. I loved her like a sister, and the donation was exactly what I said, helping family." Ridge's voice broke. "But Daniel was drunk and paranoid, and he wouldn't listen. He said terrible things. I said terrible things back. We hung up angry. And the next day he was dead." Ridge nodded, the guilt he'd been carrying for weeks finally spoken out loud. "I think that's why he was distracted. Why he didn't see the drunk driver until it was too late. We fought, and I didn't call to apologize, and then he was gone, and I could never take back what I said. Julia was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then she said, "What did you say to him?" "In the fight?" Ridge closed his eyes, the memory acid in his throat. "I told him if he was that insecure about being a father, maybe he shouldn't have asked me to help in the first place. Told him he was being selfish and paranoid. Told him," his voice dropped to a whisper, "told him I was done being the family fix-it man." "And then you became exactly that," Julia said softly, "by taking Lily." "I had to prove to myself, to Daniel's memory, that I didn't resent helping them, that I would do anything for his daughter." "Your daughter, too." Ridge opened his eyes. "What?" "She's your daughter, too, Ridge. Biologically, yes. But also in every way that matters. You feed her, change her, comfort her. You stayed up all night with her when she was fussy. You brought her to an emergency room at 4 a.m. because the woman caring for her needed help." Julia's voice was firm despite her exhaustion. "You're her father, and it's time you stopped apologizing for it. Daniel is dead." Julia said it gently but without flinching. "And whatever he wanted, whatever he planned, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is Lily, what she needs, and she needs you to be her father without guilt or shame or endless second-guessing." Ridge felt something break open in his chest, some knot of guilt and grief he'd been carrying for so long it had become part of his structure. Tears burned his eyes. "I don't know how," he admitted. "Then we'll figure it out together." Julia smiled weakly. "After I get out of this hospital bed, after we make sure the baby, I'm calling him Thomas, after we make sure Thomas is strong enough to come home, after we deal with your mother and CPS and whatever else is coming." "That's a lot of afters." "Welcome to family," Julia said. "It's all afters, and figuring it out as you go." They sat in silence for a moment, hands linked, Lily sleeping between them, the new baby Thomas fighting for strength upstairs in the NICU. Then the door opened, and a woman walked in. She was in her mid-50s, thin to the point of gauntness, with hair that might have been blonde once but was now gray and pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was lined with hard living, but her eyes, pale blue like Ridge's, were sharp and clear. Ridge stood abruptly, his hand pulling free from Julia's. "Mom." Sarah Crawford looked at her son, then at Julia, then at Lily sleeping in her car seat. Her expression was unreadable. "I heard there was an emergency," Sarah said. Her voice was rough, worn by years of cigarettes. "Figured if I was going to meet my granddaughter, now was as good a time as any." "How did you even know we were here?" Ridge demanded. "I still have friends in this county, people who remember me from before." Sarah moved closer, her eyes fixed on Lily. "She looks like Daniel. Same nose, same mouth." "Don't." Ridge stepped between his mother and the baby. "Don't come in here and pretend you have rights. You gave those up when you walked out." "I know what I gave up." Sarah's voice was steady. "And I know I can't get it back, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stand by and watch you make the same mistakes I did." "What mistakes?" "Lying, keeping secrets, pretending you're something you're not." Sarah looked past Ridge to Julia. "He told you about the fight with Daniel. But did he tell you what Daniel said? His last words to Ridge?" Ridge went white. "Mom, don't." "Daniel said, if anything happens to us, you better take care of my daughter like she's your own, because she is your own, whether you admit it or not." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I heard the whole thing. Daniel called me after, drunk and crying, told me everything. Said he was scared he'd ruined his relationship with his brother. Said he was going to call Ridge in the morning and apologize." "But he didn't get the chance," Julia said quietly. "No, and Ridge has been carrying that guilt ever since." Sarah looked at her son. "You think Daniel died angry at you, but he died knowing you loved him and his daughter, died trusting you to do exactly what you've been doing." Ridge stared at his mother, stunned. "He called you?" "Called me drunk and sobbing at 2 a.m, just like he used to when he was a teenager and I was still around." Sarah's face twisted with old pain. "We'd been talking again, the last few years, trying to, I don't know, rebuild something. He didn't tell you because he knew you weren't ready to forgive me yet." "I'm still not." "I know, and I'm not asking you to." Sarah turned to Julia. "But I am asking you to help him see that being Lily's father isn't a betrayal. It's what Daniel wanted, what Natalie wanted too. How would you know what Natalie wanted? Ridge asked bitterly. Because she called me 2 days before she died, asked if I would be willing to be in Lily's life if something happened to them, said every child deserves to know their family, even the broken parts. Sarah pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. She sent me this. She handed it to Julia, who unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, written in neat cursive. Dear Sarah, Julia read aloud, I know we've only met once, but Daniel speaks of you often, with love and sadness both. He wants you in his daughter's life, and so do I. We understand you're working on your recovery, and we're proud of you for that. If anything should happen to us, please help Ridge with Lily. He'll try to do everything alone, but he needs family. He needs his mother. Please don't let your past mistakes keep you from being there for him and for our daughter. With hope, Natalie. Julia looked up to find Ridge standing perfectly still, his face a mask of controlled emotion. Sarah was crying silently, tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. I've been clean for 3 years, Sarah said. Working a program, trying to make amends where I can. I'm not the mother I should have been, can't change that. But I can be the grandmother Lily deserves. Ridge shook his head slowly. I can't do this right now. Julia just had surgery. There's a baby in the NICU. I can't deal with you too. I'm not asking you to deal with me. I'm asking you to let me help. Sarah's voice gentled. You're exhausted, Ridge. You've been holding everything together alone for weeks. Let me watch Lily while you're here with Julia. Let me do one small thing to start making up for all the things I didn't do. Ridge looked at Julia, desperate for guidance. She nodded slightly. One small thing, Ridge said finally. You can stay with Lily in the waiting room while I visit Thomas in the NICU, but that's all. That's enough, Sarah said. That's a start. She picked up Lily's car seat with surprising gentleness, cradling it like precious cargo. As she walked toward the door, she paused and looked back at Ridge. Daniel forgave you for that fight, forgave you before he even got in the car that day. Maybe it's time you forgave yourself. Then she was gone, leaving Ridge and Julia alone in the recovery room. Ridge sank into the chair beside Julia's bed, his head in his hands. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to witness that. Don't apologize. Julia reached for his hand again. Your mother, she's trying. That's more than a lot of people do. She left us. Left Daniel and me when we were kids. We had to raise ourselves while she chased her next fix. And now she's clean, trying to make amends. Julia squeezed his hand. I'm not saying you have to forgive her, but maybe you could let her try to help. Let her be part of this family we're building. What family? Ridge looked up at her. Julia, you almost died tonight. Because of the stress I brought into your life, the secrets, the complications, all of it. Maybe you'd be better off if I took Lily and left. Is that what you want? No. But what I want doesn't matter if it's hurting you. Julia was quiet for a moment, then she said, Do you know what I thought about while they were putting me under for surgery? While I was losing consciousness? Ridge shook his head. I thought about who would take care of Thomas if I died, who would raise him and love him and tell him about his father. Julia's voice was steady. And I realized the only person I trusted with that was you, a man I've known for less than a month, a man who came into my life with nothing but a baby and a borrowed truck. Julia, I trust you, Ridge, with my life, with my son's life, with everything that matters. She met his eyes. So no, you're not leaving. You're staying. We're figuring this out together, all of it. The babies, your mother, CPS, whatever comes next. Why? Ridge asked desperately. Why would you choose this? Choose me? Because Thomas asked me to help you. Because you're a good man who's been trying to do right by people his whole life. Because those babies upstairs need us both. Julia's voice softened. And because for the first time since Thomas died, I don't feel completely alone. Ridge felt his walls finally, fully crumble. He laid his head on the edge of Julia's bed and let himself cry. Not the controlled grief he'd been carrying, but real, ragged sobs that shook his whole body. Julia's hand found his hair, stroking gently, the way a mother comforts a child. It's okay, she murmured. You're okay. We're all going to be okay. And in that hospital room, with dawn breaking outside the windows, Ridge let himself believe it. 3 weeks later, Ridge stood in front of the bathroom mirror in Julia's farmhouse, trying to knot his tie with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Today was the custody hearing. Today, a judge would decide whether Lily would stay with him or enter the foster care system. Behind him, the door opened. Sarah Crawford appeared, looking uncharacteristically nervous in a simple blue dress. "You're going to strangle yourself," she said, stepping forward to fix his tie. Her hands were steady where his were not. Ridge stood stiffly while his mother adjusted the knot, smoothed his collar. It was the first time she'd touched him in 15 years, and the gesture felt simultaneously foreign and achingly familiar. "There," Sarah said, stepping back. "You look respectable." "I look terrified." "You should. This is terrifying." She met his eyes in the mirror. "But you're doing the right thing, claiming her, fighting for her." In the past 3 weeks, Sarah had proven herself in small, consistent ways. She'd moved into a weekly rental near town and showed up every day to help, watching Lily while Ridge worked, bringing groceries when supplies ran low, sitting with Julia while baby Thomas was still in the NICU, reading him stories through the plastic walls of his incubator. She didn't ask for forgiveness or make grand speeches about redemption. She just showed up, day after day, proving through actions what words could never convey. Ridge still didn't trust her completely, still waited for her to disappear again. But he was learning that maybe trust was something you built slowly, one kept promise at a time. Downstairs, Julia was feeding Thomas, who had finally come home from the hospital 3 weeks ago. He was still tiny, just over 4 pounds, but he was breathing on his own and eating well. The doctor said he would be fine. Julia herself was recovering slowly. The preeclampsia had resolved after delivery, but the trauma of the emergency surgery had taken its toll. She tired easily and couldn't lift anything heavier than the babies. But she was alive. She was healing. That was enough. "Ready?" she asked when Ridge came downstairs. She was dressed in a simple black dress that accommodated her still healing body, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked beautiful and strong, and Ridge felt his chest tighten with something he wasn't ready to name. "As I'll ever be," Ridge said. He picked up Lily's car seat. Sarah took Thomas's. Together, the 4 of them walked out to Ridge's truck. The Collier County Courthouse was a squat brick building that had seen better decades. Ridge had never been inside before, had always associated courthouses with judgment and condemnation. Today would do nothing to change that association. They met Vanessa Ruiz in the hallway outside the courtroom. She was in full professional mode, clipboard in hand, but she smiled when she saw them. "Ready?" she asked. "No," Ridge admitted, "but we're here anyway." "That's the spirit." Vanessa's smile faded to something more serious. "I need to prepare you for what's about to happen. The judge is going to ask you directly about Lily's parentage, about the donation, about Daniel and Natalie's wishes. You need to be completely honest. I will be. And there's something else." Vanessa glanced at Sarah. "Your mother filed a petition this morning to be considered as a potential guardian if the court decides you're not suitable." Ridge's blood ran cold. "What?" Sarah stepped forward quickly. "Not instead of you. In support of you. I told the judge I want to help you raise Lily, but only if you're awarded custody. I'm vouching for you, Ridge, not trying to take her away." Ridge stared at his mother, trying to process this. Sarah, who had abandoned him, was now standing up in court to support him. The world had gone surreal. Before he could respond, the courtroom doors opened. A bailiff called them inside. The judge was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, Judge Margaret Chen. According to Vanessa, she was fair but strict, someone who cared more about outcomes than procedures. They took their seats. Ridge and Julia in the front row, Sarah just behind them, Vanessa at the petitioner's table. Across the aisle sat a lawyer from CPS, a sharp-faced man who looked like he'd never met a regulation he didn't love. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Chen reviewed the file, then looked up at Ridge. "Mr. Crawford, I understand you're petitioning for legal guardianship of Lily Crawford, a minor child currently in your care." Ridge stood. "Yes, Your Honor." And I understand there are some unusual circumstances regarding your relationship to the child. Yes, Your Honor. Then let's hear them. In your own words, tell me about Lily. Ridge took a breath. This was it, the moment of truth. Lily is my biological daughter, he began. But she was raised for the first week of her life by my brother Daniel and his wife Natalie. They couldn't have children naturally, so I donated sperm for artificial insemination. Natalie got pregnant. Lily was born. And for 10 days she had 2 parents who loved her completely. Judge Chen made notes. And then? And then they died in a car accident. Drunk driver. Ridge's voice steadied. I was watching Lily when it happened. When the police came to tell me, I realized I was all she had left. So I took her, kept her, tried to give her the life Daniel and Natalie wanted for her, without legal documentation of guardianship. I had a letter from Natalie, expressing her wishes, but no, nothing legally binding. The CPS lawyer stood. Your Honor, Mr. Crawford's lack of proper documentation put this child at risk. He was homeless, unemployed, and attempting to circumvent the proper foster care system. I was trying to keep my daughter out of a system that bounces children between strangers, Ridge said, his voice rising slightly. I was trying to honor my brother's last wishes. Judge Chen held up a hand. Mr. Crawford, tell me about that, about your brother's last wishes. So Ridge told her about the fight, about Daniel's drunken accusations and Ridge's angry responses, about the last conversation they'd had before Daniel died. My brother died thinking I resented him, Ridge said, his voice breaking. Died before I could tell him I didn't. That helping him have a child was the best thing I'd ever done. That I loved him, and I loved Lily, and I would do anything to protect what he and Natalie built. And yet you kept the truth about Lily's parentage hidden. Because I promised Daniel I would never claim her, that she would grow up knowing he was her father, and he was in every way that mattered. Judge Chen sat back. Mrs. Brennan, you're petitioning to be Lily's foster parent while Mr. Crawford pursues formal adoption. Why? Julia stood, Thomas cradled carefully in her arms. Because Lily belongs with Ridge, and Ridge needed a stable home to prove he could provide for her. I'm offering that home. You're a new mother yourself, a widow. You barely know Mr. Crawford. Why take on this responsibility? Because my late husband asked me to help Ridge, and because I've watched him with Lily for the past month. I've seen him wake up every 2 hours to feed her, seen him comfort her when she cries, seen him sacrifice sleep and money and pride to keep her safe. Julia's voice was firm. He's her father. He deserves the chance to prove it legally. The CPS lawyer stood again. Your Honor, while Mr. Crawford's intentions may be good, the fact remains that he engaged in deception. He misrepresented his relationship to the child. He operated outside proper legal channels. These are not the actions of someone who should be entrusted with a vulnerable infant. Vanessa Ruiz stood. Your Honor, if I may, I've been the assigned caseworker on this case since the beginning. I've conducted home visits, reviewed documentation, observed Mr. Crawford's care of Lily. In my professional opinion, this child is thriving. She's healthy, loved, bonded to her caregiver. Removing her from Mr. Crawford's care would be traumatic and unnecessary. Your professional opinion seems to contradict your agency's position, Judge Chen observed. It does, and I'm willing to face disciplinary action for it. Vanessa's voice didn't waver. Because I've seen too many children harmed by blind adherence to procedure. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same. In this case, the right thing is keeping Lily with her father. Judge Chen was quiet for a long moment, reviewing documents. The courtroom held its breath. Then the judge looked up. Mrs. Sarah Crawford, you filed a support petition this morning. I'd like to hear from you. Sarah stood, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Your Honor, I'm Ridge and Daniel's mother. I wasn't a good mother to them when they were young. I was an addict. I abandoned them. They raised themselves while I destroyed myself. Her voice shook but didn't break. I've been clean for 3 years. I'm not asking for custody. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking to be allowed to help, to watch my granddaughter while Ridge works, to be the grandmother Daniel and Natalie wanted me to be. You have a criminal record, the CPS lawyer interjected. Drug possession, theft, public intoxication. All from more than 5 years ago, Sarah said steadily. I've paid my debt. done my time, worked my program. I'm not the same person I was. Judge Chen looked between Sarah and Ridge. Mr. Crawford, how do you feel about your mother's involvement? Ridge stood again. This was the moment, the choice. He could reject his mother publicly, keep her at arm's length, prove to the judge that he didn't need anyone, or he could do the harder thing, the braver thing. My mother hurt me, Ridge said slowly. She left when I needed her, made me grow up too fast, taught me that people you love will disappoint you. Sarah flinched but didn't look away. But in the past 3 weeks, she's shown up every single day. She's helped with Lily, supported Julia, proven that people can change. Ridge took a breath. Daniel forgave her, started rebuilding a relationship with her. I think Lily deserves to know her grandmother, and I deserve the chance to learn if forgiveness is possible. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Judge Chen made a note. This court appreciates honesty, the judge said, and I've heard a lot of it today. Mr. Crawford, you've admitted to deception. You've acknowledged operating outside legal channels. These are serious concerns. Ridge's heart sank. However, Judge Chen continued, you've also demonstrated genuine care for this child. You've sought stable employment. You've accepted help from Ms. Brennan. You've even begun reconciling with your mother. These are the actions of someone committed to doing right by a child, even when it's difficult. She looked at the CPS lawyer. I've reviewed caseworker Ruiz's reports. They're thorough and convincing. I see no evidence that Lily is in danger. Then she looked at Ridge. Mr. Crawford, I'm granting you temporary legal guardianship of Lily Crawford, pending completion of formal adoption proceedings. You will work with CPS to complete all required documentation. You will maintain stable housing and employment. And you will participate in parenting classes to ensure you have the support you need. Ridge felt his knees go weak. Your Honor, thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. This is conditional. If at any point I see evidence that Lily's welfare is at risk, I will not hesitate to revisit this decision. Judge Chen turned to Julia. Mrs. Brennan, your foster care application is approved on an expedited basis. You will be Lily's official placement while Mr. Crawford completes adoption. Is this arrangement acceptable to both of you? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. Then this court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Ridge turned to Julia, and before he could think about it, he pulled her into a hug, careful of baby Thomas between them. Julia wrapped her free arm around him and held tight. We did it, she whispered. We actually did it. Behind them, Sarah was crying openly. Vanessa was smiling. Even the bailiff looked pleased. They walked out of the courthouse together, this strange patchwork family held together by tragedy and choice and stubborn love. Ridge carried Lily, Julia carried Thomas. Sarah walked beside them like she was afraid she might disappear if she stepped too far away. Outside, the Texas sun was bright and warm. Ridge tilted his face toward it, letting the light wash over him. What happens now? Sarah asked. Ridge looked at Julia, at the two babies, at his mother, at the future that had seemed impossible a month ago. Now we go home, he said simply. 6 months later, the farmhouse looked different. The pastures were green again after fall rains. The fences Ridge had spent weekends repairing stood straight and strong. Inside, the rooms that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with life. It was Christmas morning, and the house smelled like cinnamon and pine. Ridge woke early, as he always did, to Lily's first stirrings. She was 8 months old now, pulling herself up on furniture, babbling constantly in a language only she understood. He changed her diaper, dressed her in the red velvet dress Sarah had bought, brought her downstairs where Julia was already up, feeding Thomas his morning bottle. "Merry Christmas," Julia said, smiling at them. "Merry Christmas," Ridge replied. He leaned down and kissed her, soft and brief, the kind of kiss that had become natural over the past few months. They hadn't talked about what they were to each other, hadn't defined the relationship that had grown from necessity into something deeper. They just lived it, day by day, raising babies and building a life and letting love happen in the quiet spaces between crises. The front door opened, and Sarah came in, carrying bags of presents and a pan of her famous cinnamon rolls. She'd moved into a small house in town 2 months ago, but spent most of her time here, being the grandmother she'd never thought she'd get to be. "Merry Christmas, family," she called out. Family. The word had become real through repetition, through daily choices to show up and stay and forgive. Ridge settled Lily in her high chair and started making coffee, while Julia fed Thomas and Sarah began pulling gifts from bags. The Christmas tree in the corner was small but covered in ornaments, some old from Julia's marriage to Thomas, some new from this year. Under the tree, Ridge had hidden 2 small boxes, one for Julia, one for Sarah. He'd spent weeks agonizing over them, trying to find the right words. After breakfast, they gathered in the living room for presents. Lily demolished wrapping paper with gleeful enthusiasm. Thomas watched everything with wide eyes, already curious about the world at 6 months old. When it came time for Ridge's gifts, he handed Julia her box first. She opened it carefully and found a simple silver necklace. 2 pendants intertwined, one engraved with Thomas, one with Lily. "For the children we're raising together," Ridge said quietly. "Both of them." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Ridge, it's beautiful." "There's more. Look inside the box lid." She did and found a folded piece of paper. She opened it and read the handwritten words. "Julia, I'm not good with speeches. I'm not good with grand gestures, but I know I want to spend my life with you, raising these babies, building this home, being the family we chose instead of the one fate gave us. If you'll have me, will you marry me? Love, Ridge." Julia looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "You're asking through a note?" "I was afraid I'd mess up the words if I tried to say them out loud." Ridge knelt beside her chair. "But I'll say them now if you want. Julia Brennan, will you marry me?" "Yes," Julia said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." Sarah was crying too, and even baby Thomas seemed to understand something important was happening because he stopped fussing and just watched with those serious eyes. Ridge pulled Julia into a kiss, deeper this time, full of promise and future and all the things they'd built from wreckage. When they broke apart, Sarah cleared her throat. "My turn. I have something for both of you." She handed them a large envelope. Inside were legal documents, official and stamped. "I petitioned the court," Sarah explained, "for grandparent visitation rights, but not to take anything from you, just to make it official, to prove I'm committed to being in Lily and Thomas's lives forever." Ridge read through the documents, saw his mother's signature next to his own, making her officially recognized as family. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "Yes, I did. I needed to prove to myself as much as to you that I'm staying." Sarah's voice shook. "I missed so much with you and Daniel. I won't miss anything with these babies." Ridge stood and hugged his mother for the first time in 15 years. She held him tight, and they both cried, and it felt like something broken finally beginning to heal. The rest of the day passed in a blur of joy. They ate too much, played with babies, took pictures by the tree, called Julia's sister Linda in Dallas to share the engagement news. As evening fell, Ridge stood on the front porch watching the sun set over the farmland. Julia joined him, Thomas sleeping against her shoulder. "This is nice," she said softly. "Peace, family, home. It is." Ridge put his arm around her, pulling her close. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Nothing's going to go wrong. We're past the hard part." "Are we?" Julia smiled. "Okay, maybe not past it, maybe just learning how to live with it." Inside, they heard Lily laugh at something Sarah was doing. The sound was pure and joyful and full of life. "I was thinking," Julia said, "about names." "Names?" "For after we get married. I want to keep Brennan. For Thomas's sake, so he has his father's name. But I also want to take Crawford. Be part of your family officially." "Julia Brennan Crawford," Ridge tested. "It's a mouthful. It's perfect. 2 families joined together, the past and the future." Ridge kissed the top of her head. "When do you want to do it? Get married?" "Soon. Spring, maybe. Something small. Just family." "We don't have much family." "We have enough." Julia looked up at him. "We have exactly enough." They stood together as darkness fell, 2 people who had found each other in the wreckage of loss and built something beautiful from the pieces. Behind them, through the window, they could see Sarah playing with Lily, the grandmother and granddaughter, making up for lost time. 3 years later, the farmhouse had expanded. Ridge and Julia had added 2 more children through foster care adoption, siblings who had needed a home. The house rang with laughter and arguments and the beautiful chaos of family. Lily was 3.5, talking nonstop, asking endless questions about everything. Thomas was almost 3, quieter but watchful, his father's son through and through. Ridge had proposed making the arrangement with Julia's father, William Stokes, had shown up at the wedding, awkward and uncertain, but there. He came by once a month now to see his grandchildren, slowly rebuilding what had been broken. Ridge's business, Crawford Cattle Services, had grown from a one-man operation to employing 3 full-time ranch hands. Sarah ran the books, proving surprisingly good with numbers. And Julia had gone back to school to get her library science degree, working toward opening a literacy center in town. She'd found purpose in helping others the way she'd been helped. On this particular Sunday evening, they gathered on the porch for their weekly family dinner. Sarah brought her famous fried chicken. William brought ice cream. The children ran wild in the yard, shrieking with joy. Ridge stood with Julia, watching their expanded family, and thought about the day he'd stood in that auction tent, holding Lily, certain his life was over. He'd been wrong. His life had been about to begin. "What are you thinking about?" Julia asked, sliding her hand into his. "About how far we've come, about how none of this was in any plan I ever had. The best things never are." Julia leaned her head on his shoulder. "The best things just happen when you're brave enough to say yes to help." Ridge pulled her close and kissed her, this woman who had saved him by letting him save her, this woman who had built a family from strangers and called it home. Inside the house, Lily called out, "Daddy, Mama, come see what Grandma Sarah taught me." "Coming?" Ridge called back. They went inside together, hand in hand, into the noise and mess and beautiful imperfection of the life they'd chosen. The auction had been the beginning. But this was everything that mattered. This was family. Her family, hard-won and precious and real. This was home. The end.